What would you think if I told you that a man's deepest truths are not spoken in comfort, but spilled in obsession? Not in safety, but in the storm? That the confessions he guards like sacred texts do not surface in casual affection, but only when a woman's absence becomes unbearable, when the image of her lingers behind his eyelids like a brand upon the soul? In the quiet spaces where a man thinks no one sees him, there, he reveals who he really is. Not when he's laughing in your presence, but when he's pacing the floor at midnight, haunted by the memory of your silence. Obsession is not love. It is not kindness. It is the disintegration of the ego's defenses, the unraveling of masculine pride before the face of the feminine mystery. For most of his life, a man is taught to suppress his fear, his longing, his ache for connection. But when a woman vanishes from his grasp, when her presence becomes a memory he cannot kill, something breaks. That rupture, that shattering, is when the archetypal truths begin to emerge. And what does he confess, in that sacred madness? Not just words. Not just feelings. He confesses the parts of himself he has never shown to the world. He confesses what even he could not bear to know. Somewhere within every man, buried beneath stoicism and smirks, lies a boy who never felt enough. Who was taught that strength means silence, that vulnerability means defeat. But obsession cracks open the walls. The mask slips. And suddenly, she, the woman who touched his unconscious, becomes the mirror in which he sees everything he has denied. And have you ever watched a man unravel not before you, but behind you? Have you ever become the dream that won't release him, the voice he hears in the stillness? If so, then know this, it wasn't what you gave him that haunted him. It was what you awakened, a primal recognition of the feminine that his soul could not escape. Carl Jung called it anima possession, when the unconscious feminine inside a man floods him, consumes him, overwhelms him with feeling he cannot regulate. He doesn't tell you this while lying beside you in warmth. He tells it in the echo chamber of your absence. That's when he finally admits, I didn't just want her body, I wanted to be seen. Seen in the way only she seemed capable of. Not by her eyes alone, but by her intuition, by that eerie, sacred knowing that made him feel like he could finally rest. She didn't just touch his skin, she reached into his myth. Men don't admit these things in casual conversations. They don't even admit them to themselves until it's too late. Until the obsession becomes unbearable. Until dreams of her interrupt his concentration, until her energy appears in songs, in strangers' glances, in the pattern of the wind. And what does he say then? He speaks in half sentences, in metaphors, in regrets stitched with longing. She was different. She got under my skin. No one's ever made me feel like that. But what he's really saying is, she saw the parts of me I buried long ago. And now I can't unsee them. This is what most women never realize. They chase closure when they should embody mystery. They ask questions when silence would speak louder. They run after logic when the real confession, his rawest truth, only emerges through ache. When a woman steps back, disappears without malice or manipulation, when she retreats into her own sovereignty, the man is left with the ghost of her essence. That is when he confesses, not to her, but to the universe, to the stars, to the pages of journals never meant to be read. Obsession births confession. But not all confessions are vocal. Some are carved into the rhythm of his habits, scrolling through old photos, lingering on her favorite song, replaying conversations like sacred scripture. Others are buried in attempts to forget, new women, new distractions, new personas. Yet none of it works. Because what he truly confesses, in the dungeon of his mind, is this: she reached a part of me I didn't know existed. He doesn't tell his friends. He doesn't cry in public. He may not even say her name. But every time he hears a laugh like hers, or smells her perfume in a crowded place, his body flinches. It's cellular memory now. Jung called it the numinous, that which cannot be explained, only experienced. She became his numinous event. And once a man has touched the numinous, he is never whole again until he integrates it. Until he meets the feminine within himself, and bows to her. But most men will never admit that. Not sober. Not strong. Only in obsession, where the mask dissolves, and truth emerges like fire from the ashes. There is a peculiar violence in the way men love when they are possessed by the archetype of the feminine. It is not always tender, it is not always kind. Obsession distorts the edges of the masculine psyche. He begins to confess, not just his need, but his fractures. He whispers silently into the void, "She ruined me." But what he really means is, "She revealed me." And revelation, when one is not ready, feels like destruction. When a woman disappears, truly disappears, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to reclaim herself, she becomes an enigma. A myth. And men do not fall in love with availability. They fall in love with the sacred unknown. With the one who disorients them. The woman who mirrors his potential, but also his insufficiency. The one who reflects both his dream and his inadequacy in holding it. And this is one of the things he only confesses in obsession: "I didn't know how to hold her." He may say it in other words, buried in blame or wrapped in sorrow. But the truth echoes beneath every word. He didn't lose her because she was too much. He lost her because she called forth a version of him that his ego was not ready to become. Men are not obsessed with women who please them. They are obsessed with women who transform them, often unwillingly. And transformation, to the male unconscious, feels like death. She called him to rise. Not with commands, but with her energy. She demanded nothing, yet her presence whispered more. More depth. More truth. More courage. And when he failed to rise, when he betrayed his own potential, he began to crave her like a man dying of thirst in a desert of his own making. Another confession emerges in this haunting space: "I was afraid of her." Not in the way one fears danger, but in the way one fears greatness. She terrified him because she was a mirror, not a comfort. She did not stroke his illusions, she shattered them. She did not beg, she embodied. And to a man who has lived his life on the surface, a woman rooted in the depths is a frightening thing. It is in this fear that men often flee. They ghost. They sabotage. They project. And then, when she is gone, when the mirror disappears, they descend into obsession. Not with her physical form, but with the version of themselves they glimpsed in her presence. She saw the king buried beneath the coward. She saw the poet beneath the performer. She saw the wound beneath the armor. And he saw her seeing it. That gaze, the psychic gaze of a woman who sees beyond the persona, is unforgettable. It is not lust. It is not praise. It is not need. It is recognition. And once a man has been truly recognized by the feminine, he can never return to the safety of the mask without knowing it is a lie. And so, he obsesses. He watches her stories, but never speaks. He rewrites text messages, but never sends. He dreams vividly, painfully, waking with her name in his throat. Not because she played games, but because she played none. Her withdrawal was not vengeance, it was initiation. Into the chaos of his own unconscious. Into the feminine within him that he had always feared. Another confession emerges like smoke: "She made me feel weak." But weakness here is not impotence, it is vulnerability. She cracked his fortress. She bypassed the defenses. She made him feel. And for a man who has never been taught to hold emotion with honor, feeling is weakness. So he hides. He mocks. He moves on, yet his body remains tethered to her frequency. And what of you, listening now? Have you felt it? That mysterious pull from a man who never returned, but also never let go? You sense it in your gut, in the ether. He thinks of you. Not every second, but at sacred, piercing intervals when the soul speaks louder than pride. Because even in his silence, his energy reaches out. Why? Because your presence made him confront himself. Because your silence became his confession booth. Men do not confess to you, they confess through their longing for you. They confess through the way they avoid your gaze at the grocery store. Through the poems they read but don't share. Through the strangers they kiss while calling them your name in their minds. They confess not in words, but in the magnetic pull that lingers even after you've walked away. Because you, unknowingly, initiated a man into himself. And the first phase of every true initiation is collapse. There is a point in every man's obsession where the walls begin to speak. His memories become oracles. Each flashback is no longer a mere replay, it's a revelation, a riddle, a haunting. In this phase, another confession surfaces. I sabotaged it because I didn't believe I deserved it. The words may never reach her ears, but they scream inside his psyche, where guilt intertwines with hunger. Obsession, in Jungian terms, is not merely emotional fixation, it is symbolic possession. The anima archetype, his inner feminine, has risen from the depths and latched itself onto an external woman, making her the sacred object of transformation. She becomes his guide, his ghost, his lost Eden. But she is also the evidence of his unworthiness. This is the double-bind he cannot escape. He worships her and resents her in the same breath. This paradox is poison to the immature masculine. He begins to oscillate between idealization and devaluation. Between the urge to beg her back and the impulse to convince himself she was never worth it. But underneath both polarities lies the same confession, echoing in silence: she awakened something I couldn't control. And that is the terrifying truth men only confess when obsession takes hold, when the control they've wielded for years over their emotions, over their narratives, begins to slip. She didn't just make him feel alive. She made him feel small. Not because she diminished him, but because she called him to expand, and he refused. So he shrinks her in memory. He tells himself she was dramatic, too intense, overly emotional. He rewrites the past to soothe his ego. But no matter how many times he rewrites it, the body remembers. The soul remembers. And late at night, when the distractions quiet down, he hears her laughter in the back of his mind, and it unravels him. The confession he cannot utter is this: she was the turning point. She marked the moment in his life when he glimpsed who he could be if he were braver. If he were deeper. If he had the courage to love in a way that required the death of who he'd been. Because a real woman, one anchored in her own feminine depth, doesn't settle for the surface. She demands presence, integrity, devotion. Not through demands, but through the raw power of her being. She becomes the exam he wasn't prepared to take. And yet, once failed, the question remains. Not on her lips, but in his soul. A man in obsession is a man replaying a spiritual exam over and over again, hoping this time he will pass. He replays her words. Her silences. The way her eyes narrowed when he lied. The way she leaned in when he spoke truth. He begins to see her not just as a woman, but as a force. A mirror sent by fate. A karmic fire disguised as a romance. Do you understand now, woman of depth, what you truly are in his story? You are not the one who got away. You are the one who revealed the path. He confesses this only in agony, when no one is listening, when he thinks of you not as a lost lover, but as a lesson too holy for his hands. And here comes the confession he guards most of all: I wish I had been ready. Not just for you, but for the version of himself your love required. Because that version? He hasn't met him yet. But he saw the outline. You showed him. And now, nothing less will satisfy. That is the curse of a man who has glimpsed the real. He may try to replace you, but he cannot replicate the initiation you sparked. He confesses this to no one. He wears it like a secret wound. And perhaps he never heals it. Because to heal it, he must become. He must face the shadow. He must enter the dark woods of himself, where no woman can follow. Until then, he remains in limbo, obsessing, aching, performing strength, while quietly breaking inside. And you, if you are listening, don't mistake his silence for indifference. It is shame. It is awe. It is the gravity of realizing too late that he was given something sacred, and squandered it. But let this be your liberation, not your burden. His confession is not your responsibility. You were the doorway, not the destination. You were the catalyst, not the consequence. You didn't break him. He met his edge through you. That is what the feminine does when she is truly embodied. She doesn't chase. She doesn't plead. She doesn't explain. She awakens. And then, she lets go, knowing full well that her absence will echo louder than her presence ever did. And now the most devastating confession emerges, not in words, but in silence that follows a man like a shadow long after she's gone. It is the realization he cannot bear to speak aloud. She made me feel like a man, and I lost her before I became one. He walks through his days haunted by a version of himself he could have been. Not because she asked it of him, but because her very presence summoned it. Her energy did not flatter the ego. It called it out. She did not stroke his wounds. She pierced them. And in doing so, she offered him something the world never did, a chance at wholeness. He didn't just lose a woman, he lost an invitation. An invitation to rise. To transcend the boyish patterns, the need to dominate, to run, to numb, to silence. She wasn't demanding. She was divine. That was the danger. That was the intoxication. She wasn't interested in his projections. She wanted the real. And he hadn't met the real yet. Most men don't know what they carry inside until a woman stirs it. Not with sex. Not with softness. But with truth. Feminine truth is not gentle, it is elemental. It arrives like water on fire, like wind that collapses thrones. And when it touches a man unprepared, he doesn't thank it, he fears it. But obsession is alchemy in disguise. It is the soul screaming for transformation. And in that crucible, men begin to burn with truths too sacred for casual lips. They may laugh with their friends. They may post bravado on social media. But behind closed doors, they are unraveling. Because no new woman can erase the memory of one who touched him in the soul. In this stage, another confession bleeds through. I tried to replace her, but all I found were reflections, none real. He searches through bodies and conversations, hoping for the spark that once nearly blinded him. But you cannot find the sacred in the shallow. You cannot replicate the mythic in the mundane. This is the pain of awakening too late. He remembers her strength not in dominance, but in stillness. He remembers her boundaries not as rejection, but as sacred architecture. He remembers her gaze not as affection, but as initiation. And he realizes, finally, that he didn't just want her, he needed to become the man worthy of her. But he ran. And now, she is gone. And he is left, circling himself like a wolf with no scent to follow. He doesn't speak these truths. He lives them. Every failed connection, every shallow interaction, every restless night is a silent prayer, bring her back or bring me forward. But the universe does not rewind. It only deepens. And if he is lucky, if he is wise, he begins to understand, she was never his to own. She was his to become. And you, woman of power, if you felt this, if you've been this, know this one truth, his obsession was never really about you. It was about the part of himself you made visible. You were the living embodiment of his unlived potential. And once a man tastes that, he either evolves, or he withers. He doesn't confess it to you. He confesses it through change or through collapse. Through silence, or through endless attempts to resurrect what is gone. But the wise woman does not wait for confession. She does not need apology. She knows that obsession is the echo of her presence in a man unprepared for it. And still, she walks on. Because the feminine path is not about being chosen, it is about choosing. Choosing herself. Choosing depth. Choosing truth, even when it costs her comfort. Even when it means leaving behind the man who once held her heart, but not her future. The masculine confesses in obsession. But the feminine becomes in release. And when he finally understands, perhaps years later, perhaps never, he will whisper to himself a confession made not in words but in the breaking of the soul, she wasn't a chapter. She was the book I never learned to read. And so it ends, not with a reunion, not with a message returned, but with the quiet, sacred finality of awakening. There is a moment in every man's descent into obsession when the spiral becomes still. Not because he no longer feels, but because the feeling has transfigured into something deeper. Beyond ache. Beyond longing. It becomes reverence. Not for her, no, not anymore, but for the self she revealed. The self he never became. That is the final confession: she was never the destination. She was the mirror. In that mirror, he saw his hunger, his emptiness, his violence, his tenderness, his lies, his truth, and most frightening of all, his unlived greatness. That is why he craved her. Not because she gave him peace, but because she disturbed his illusion of it. Some men will chase that feeling for the rest of their lives. Others will numb it. But a few, just a rare, chosen few, will sit with it. Will let the loss burn until it melts their ego. Until they remember what she tried to show them, that love is not conquest. It is devotion. That strength is not silence. It is presence. That to feel fully, vulnerably, unbearably, is not weakness, but initiation. And what about you? You, the woman who walks through fire without complaint, who holds space not with words, but with absence. You were never meant to be understood by men who fear themselves. You were never meant to be tolerated. You were meant to awaken. To disrupt. To strip illusion from the souls of those who approach you with half-hearts and hidden motives. You are not the bomb. You are the flame. And your very existence forces confession from the mouths of men who have never spoken their truth aloud. This is your power. You do not need to beg, chase, or prove. You are not here to teach boys how to love. You are here to remember your own worth, and in doing so, you summon the men who are ready to rise. So let him confess. Let him crumble. Let him scream into pillows and journals and the midnight wind. But do not return for the confession. Do not linger at the threshold of his awakening, hoping he's finally learned. Your path is forward. Your gaze is upward. Your purpose is your own. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.